Welcome to Code Forward. I'm Nellie Bowles, culture and tech writer for Recode. Also with me in studio is Kurt Wagner, who covers social media for Recode. And we're here today to bring you the latest tech headlines as well as profiles of interesting players in the tech space. Up first today, the latest in the Powell versus Kleiner Perkins case. If you're not caught up, Ellen Powell filed a gender discrimination lawsuit against her employer, Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers. Her lawsuit was filed in May of 2012, and she was fired 5 months later. A decision in favor of Powell could have huge ramifications in the field of venture capital that's often criticized as being an industry that's more like a white male-dominated fraternity than a meritocracy. On day 2, John Doerr, the firm's best-known employee, testified before the court. For more, I'm joined here by attorney Drexel Bradshaw.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
No. So I've been in court every day, and it's been intense, and there are a lot of really salacious details that have been coming out and that are sort of making headlines. But what do you think her chances of actually winning this case are? That's kind of the question that I have at this point.
Unfortunately, in gender discrimination lawsuits, there's never a smoking gun. There's never a memo from the CEO that says, fire her because she's a woman or fire her because she wouldn't sleep with me anymore. You have a circumstantial case that has some pretty good salacious details. And interestingly, these cases have had a long history of being quite challenging for employees. Sometimes a success rate as low as 28 to 30%. Other times in California, where the legislation is a little bit different, a success rate in the 40 to 50% range.
Okay.
But it's normally an uphill slog for the employee.
So, like, some of the headlines are that one of the venture partners organized an all-male ski trip, and he an entrepreneur asked if he could bring other entrepreneurs who are in the Kleiner Perkins portfolio, and the venture partner said, no, we're actually going to keep it all men on this ski trip, right? And that was brought up in court. Does that help her case at all? Does that affect it, or what does that do?
Well, it's, again, circumstantial evidence of discriminatory intent on the part of that partner. But I think the testimony was a bit beyond that. The testimony was that women kill the buzz. And there are other comments that have been made by Kleiner Perkins partners that show a real animus towards women generally. And they've called this an industry run by white, nerdy men.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you look at the potential outcome, one way or the other, how big of an impact could this have on Silicon Valley, the venture capital industry as a whole? For example, if Kleiner loses this case, are we going to see a lot more gender discrimination stuff come forward? Is this going to kind of set a precedent one way or the other, or what do you think of in terms of kind of the impact this might have?
It could have broad-ranging impact for or against, because a lawsuit like this requires an incredible amount of resources, both for the employee's firm and the employer side. And if there's a large damage award, if she can actually prove malice or reckless disregard for her rights under the law, then Kleiner Perkins would be subject to punitive damages, which could be very powerful and a very powerful deterrent for other firms to cut out.
Is that a precedent, you think?
Well, and lawyers think of precedent in different terms, but it would certainly set a clear example that you need to clean up the culture to make it more in line with the rest of mainstream America. Although I think in many ways that still lags.
Is there a certain dollar amount, if we're talking a financial, payment here that might be made at the end of this? Is there a certain dollar amount or a range that would even make sense to predict at this point, or is that all just going to be totally, is that too speculative at this?
She's asking for $16 million.
She's asking for $16 million in damages related to the wages that she's lost and that she would have earned had she been treated properly under the law. But
it doesn't always come to what people ask for, right? I mean, that's not what is always settled upon, or is that?
Well, it's always up to the jury in setting a damages amount. And then the judge in this case, a highly competent jurist, will have some oversight in that. If the jury award is disproportionate to the evidence that's been presented, he has the ability to modify that. And I'm sure anyone that's unhappy would take it up on appeal.
Why didn't I mean, I know one thing, before I started covering the case, we all basically assumed it would settle. Like, none of us were really prepared for it really to go to court and for it really to be day in and day out, like reading John Doerr's emails. I mean, John Doerr, like legendary venture capitalist, none of us thought we'd be reading through his emails. Why didn't they settle? Why didn't he just, you know, pay $16 million and avoid this whole press disaster for them, really?
I'm sure he could have settled for less than 16 if the ask was 16. But, you know, I've been litigating throughout my career, and I've always believed that if everyone were reasonable, I'd have to do something else for a living.
They're keeping you employed, in other words.
Exactly.
The unreasonable are keeping you employed.
And his lawyers as well, keeping them employed.
Yeah.
Is there, in a case like this, is there kind of a general thing that the jury is kind of informed to look for? Are they tasked with saying, hey, these are kind of signals that might lean you one way or the other, or is the jury just simply thrown in there and left to their own devices? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, are there certain things that we should be picking out as signals of whether this will go one way or the other?
Well, the instructions for gender discrimination and retaliation and the failure to prevent discrimination and retaliation are fairly simple. Was the employer an employer, which I don't think there's any dispute about that? Was she an employee? And did she suffer some adverse employment decision or result that was a substantial factor? Was her gender? And so those questions put to the jury, at which point the judge will instruct them fully on all facets of the law. They'll be asked to answer those questions one way or the other. And a yes answer on each of those questions in each of the categories means she wins.
One thing I noticed my first day in the courthouse, I was chatting with people who were sitting around me, and there's one woman who's sitting next to me. I was like, what are you here for? And she's like, I'm a lawyer. And she was a little cagey about what she was there for, and I was like, well, why are you watching this? And she was like, well, I have a similar case. And I was like, you mean a venture capitalist suing her venture firm in a high-profile, like, multi-million-dollar disaster? And she was like, yeah, actually, I do. And I mean, you're in the field of law. Is this a trend you're seeing of these kind of lawsuits are starting to bubble up? Will this spur other women to do this? Where does this fit in a broader trend?
Well, a survey a few years ago pointed out that 25% of all women in the workplace feel sexually harassed, and that 70% of those women don't even report it, much less pursue a lawsuit against their employer. By and large, behaviors like this that Ellen Powell's complained of are reported and handled by the employer appropriately, and that's the end of it. And a lawsuit doesn't need to ensue. But where you have such obvious disregard for her complaints over a number of years, that's really surprising. If she achieves success, I think it would hopefully encourage women who are the victims of harassment and discrimination to speak up.
Yeah.
Why 70% not reporting sounds a little crazy high, right? Why are women in particular hesitant to come forward with these kinds of issues? Is it because this legal thing can be very daunting? Are they, being suppressed in some way? Why is that number so high, I guess?
I think there are a lot of reasons, but culturally, we are just beginning to emerge into the arena where we are adamant that women are to be treated equally.
Yeah.
But secondarily, I think that women fear retaliation, that if they report this, they'll be ostracized, they'll be shut out within the community, just like Ellen Powell's reporting happened to her, and they will ultimately lose their jobs.
One last question before we go to break. If you had to say right now, is she going to win or not? What do you think?
I haven't heard the defense case yet, but I think the defense has a long road ahead of them.
Wow.
Excellent.
All right. Hey, thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, thanks very much.
This was a wonderful chat.